Hello and welcome to this sixth lesson in the study of 1 Corinthians. To this point, we have been looking at a series of themes that all seem to harken back to the same central foundation, and that is be loving. Sometimes this word gets overworked and we think after 6 lessons we should have moved well beyond the whole idea of loving, but you got to remember, this is Paul's letter of personal concern to a group of people, the church he founded, who are going through some real struggles. And the struggles he sees and is being told about all come back to a one common denominator, and that is their understanding and ability to love one another in a Christ-like way. This is so that throughout the letter, whether he's talking about worship and how they took communion, or where he talks about the gifts that they have and the work that they have to do, or even today's lesson, which deals with unselfishness. The whole core thought is, how do you relate to others? What is it that brings you into relationship with others? And what becomes the overriding pulse of your relationship with those in the church? And we find repeatedly Paul underscores this with love. Now, this is not the kind of love that appears on TV screens and in the movies. It's not a schmaltzy kind of love, high five kind of love. This is a whole different level. And that's what we want to get to today when we talk about being unselfish. And so if you would, join me please in our opening prayer. Come, Lord, come down, come in, and come among us. Enter into our darkness with your light. Come, fill our emptiness with your presence. Dispel the clouds and reveal your glory. Come, refresh, renew, and restore us. Come, Lord, come down, come in, come among us. Amen. Now, as we move into this whole subject of being unselfish, let's use as our first text of the day, chapter 6, verses 1 through 11. In it, Paul says, if any of you has a dispute with another, do you dare to take it before the ungodly for judgment instead of before the Lord's people? Or do you not know that the Lord's people will judge the world? And if you are to judge the world, are you not competent to judge trivial cases? Do you not know that we will judge angels? How much more the things of this life? Therefore, if you have disputes about such matters, do you ask for a ruling from those whose way of life is scorned in the church? I say this to shame you. It is possible that there is nobody among you wise enough to judge a dispute between believers. But instead, one brother takes another to court, and this in front of unbelievers. The very fact that you have lawsuits among you means you have been completely defeated already. Why not rather be wronged? Why not rather be cheated? Instead, you yourselves cheat and do wrong, and you do this to your brothers and sisters. Or do you not know that wrongdoers will not inherit the kingdom of God? So do not be deceived. Neither the sexually immoral, nor idolaters, nor adulterers, nor men who have sex with men, nor thieves, nor the greedy, nor drunkards, nor slanderers, nor swindlers will inherit the kingdom of God. And that is what some of you were. But you were washed, you were sanctified, you were justified in the name of the Lord Jesus Christ and by the Spirit of our God. So as we think about being unselfish, it sounds kind of like, where does that come from in this text? Well, let's keep things in perspective. For Paul, in this letter, and in all of his theology, love is the backbone of what we are and what we do and who we bring into the life of the church and into relationships. For Paul, love is not for the faint-hearted. Love is not something that is shallow or superficial. Love, true love for one another is in fact requires strength. It requires conviction. And it's not just that willingness to be loving, but to act in a loving way. Paul expects the Corinthians in all matters of their life, including places where there are disputes. And that's where our text that we've just read comes into play. Even in the midst of having disputes with one another, to love with a Christ-like love, which means your vision, your attitude, your ability to hear and what you see is all works through the prism of Christ-like love. And that means the backbone of love is a willingness on the believer's part to oftentimes stand alone, to stand against, to stand away from, to be different than they who are around him. It is the kind of love that has courage to not just stand alone in what you believe is right, but to stand with those who might not be ordinarily, customarily accepted. It is being able to stand with those who oftentimes are in need of strength, encouragement. And it means having the endurance to love without condition. One of the things that we are not always aware of is that in order to stand up with and stand alone for something or someone, it requires that you be able to go further than just the moment. And so Paul is equating love with unselfishness. Now, in some ways, to just simply say that is, I don't want in any way to oversimplify what it means to either be loving or to be unselfish. Because though the two sound similar, to be unselfish means that you already have within you the capacity and the desire to love. To be unselfish requires this love base in order to be effective. Stop and think about, and let's look back at 1 Corinthians 13, where we first began this study, and particularly to verses 4 and 5. Because there Paul describes love. And he says, love is, number one, patient. patient. That is something we oftentimes feel ourselves lacking. I don't have the patience that requires me to wait for something to evolve, for something to begin to mature to the point where it's what it needs to be. Uh, in which case, being patient means not on my time, but on God's time. It's not a matter of me being able to move through my schedule at the rapid pace in which I would like. It means sometimes I have to wait patiently for something to develop, for someone to arrive, for something to happen in order for the next step to be taken. So we need to think more about another's good than our own. Love is patient. That means we have to wait for folks oftentimes to catch up. We accept another person for where they are as well as for who they are. So loving is patient in the sense that I see who you not only are, but who you are becoming. And I like the latter more than the former. So I'm willing to wait patiently. And I love you to do that. Love is also, Paul says, kind. Now, how does that play into being unselfish? Well, it's empathetic, it's compassionate, thoughtful. You know, if we're going to be Christ-like in our loving, it means that we need to, again, accept another person in our hearts, in our lives, and publicly be able to declare it that they are our brother, our sister, we are family. And so at times it requires more empathy. It requires more compassion. It requires that we be more thoughtful. Paul goes on to say, love does not envy. In which case, love celebrates who someone is and what someone has or what someone does. We don't become jealous because of what we see someone capable of doing or what someone has become or what someone has. We realize that when we love other people, we are not in competition with them. Let's remember, last week we talked about being workers, and we all have gifts. And as a result, each one complements and supplements the other. So therefore, we realize that in the church, we are a body of people who we just merely want to support each other as we are. Paul also says, love does not boast. Love doesn't have an ego. Christ-like love places others before ourselves. We don't have to be on center stage. We don't have to have the spotlight. We can rejoice and be glad and applaud those who, for the moment, for this time in life, need to be in the center stage. If we boast, and Paul said this, if we boast in the Lord, for what the Lord is doing. I see what you have done. I see the awards you have been given. I see the accolades that are coming to you. And in so doing, I rejoice that what you've done has been the outgrowth of God's work in you. So I boast in the Lord for what the Lord is able to accomplish. Paul also says, love is not rude. Love, a selflessness, appreciates others in their uniqueness. I don't have to look down at you because you are less than me. I should not think of myself as better than anyone else. We recognize that each and every one of us is an equal child of God. whom God has blessed and God has worked in and with in order to fulfill the task that we have as the church, which is to grow the church through the preaching and the teaching of the faith. And to that end, love is not self-seeking. Another way, this is another way to say love is not selfish. Love really does want others to have as much, be as much, and do as much as God needs them to do. So one who loves like Christ looks more to the things of others than to him or herself. Christ-like love rejoices in what others are able to do, the joy that they find. Now, the other thing Paul says is love is not easily angered. And this begins to hearken back to what we first read in this text for the day. When we talk about anger, we're talking about a strong feeling of displeasure. It's an intense emotional state. It oftentimes changes our blood pressure, changes the color, the pallor of our skin. We turn a little maybe red or crimson because we're just so enraged at something that someone has done, someone has said, or someone has not done, or someone has not said. It's a strong, uncomfortable, hostile response to a perceived provocation, hurt, or threat. Now, that can happen at any point. Some have a very low threshold for what inspires their anger, and others have a very high threshold. Fact of the matter is, Paul is saying, love, if we're going to love people as Christ loved, we are not easily angered. It takes a lot to provoke it. And in that same light, love keeps no record of wrongs. So that whatever people do, and let's face it, all of us sin. Every one of us is going to mess up in some manner, shape, or form at some time. But love does not keep a record of wrongs. It bears no grudges. It does not withhold forgiveness. And it is not absent of grace. We let it go. I spoke with a young man yesterday who is horribly, horribly angry at his father. And I said, how long are you going to hang on to this? Because it's been going on for about a year. And as a result, he really doesn't want to be in the company of his dad. And we took apart what the problem is, and it really is not very significant in the whole course of relationships. And my word to him was, let it go. But he's not a young man who lives by faith. He's not a young man who has a relationship with Jesus Christ. Love for him is pretty narrowly defined. And as a result, he is unwilling to not keep a record of wrongs. He's going to remember everything his dad does that offends him. And so therefore, he's going to withhold his company. He's going to not offer forgiveness. And that's toxic. That obviously is destroying the relationship he has with his dad. But likewise, it's destroying him. It's disabling him from having relationships that have the freedom of love in the way in which he needs to experience. So when we start looking at this text that we read, 6 verses 1 through 8, in the context of love and unselfishness. What this text does is it translates love into a selfless attitude and behavior. Because as disputes came up in the Corinthian church, people were immediately filing suit, going to court, asking a judge who was not part of the community of faith to determine what was in fact a matter of faith, because most disputes had nothing to do with property lines or who it had to do with things that were going on between them spiritually. And they were asking someone who had no idea of what the faith was about to make a judgment about that faith, about that relationship. And so Paul is raising questions and asking, what would you be willing to forego? What would you be willing to give up in order to keep peace in the church, to avoid harming the church in the public eye? Because let's face it, you take it to court and it now becomes full-blown public property, and everybody's going to be able to chime in. And what it does is it gives some kind of a definition to the outsider as to what the church is really all about. And that's nowhere close to the truth. In chapter 8 of 1 Corinthians, Paul talks about eating meat that's been offered to idols. Now, that is a rich chapter to read because, and I use it as a way of helping to understand. Paul had no problem being able to eat the meat that had been offered to idols. Number one, he understood who his God was. He understood that the meat that had been offered to idols, which was being offered publicly to be eaten as people wished to buy it or use it, was nothing more than just kind of a glorified barbecue. He had no problem being able to eat that meat because he didn't believe in the God it had been sacrificed for or to. But Paul, realizing he had the right to eat it and a desire possibly to eat it, realized that if one of his brothers or sisters who were of weaker faith, who had not reached the place where he was, saw him eat the meat, and as a result of that became conflicted in their faith to the point where maybe they lost faith, fell out of fellowship with the church, all because of what he did. He said, I will not exercise my right. I have the right to do something, but if my exercising of my right causes someone else harm, I choose not to exercise that right. That's what we're talking about here. What are you willing to forego? Are you willing to put in neutral or to not do anything at all that you have a right to do because of the impact it might have on someone who is struggling or growing in their faith, someone who has not reached the maturity that you have? Are you willing to go there and deny yourself? That's selflessness. That's being unselfish. Paul suggests that all parties in a dispute seek an outcome best for each other, which means how much am I willing to give up of my sense of rightness? I used to be a negotiator for a school board with the teachers. And the contract negotiations frequently got down to being ugly. It was very clear. We were right. They were wrong. They were right. We were wrong. And it got pretty ugly. And at one point I said, I'm not going to do this anymore unless we come up with a different method. because I'm tired of going through this horrible, horrible experience. And so it was suggested by our attorney, a board attorney, that we seek another method where we would consider interest. It was called interest-based bargaining, where the whole principle was we listened to each other's interests around each subject and see if there was a way that we could come to a consensus. Now, that is a magnificent word. I love to use that word, and I love to practice that, but it takes time. It means I listen to you, you listen to me, and we find a place in the center where we both can live with what we can arrive at. We don't get everything we want, but we get enough that we can live with it and not just, and it feels good. This is what Paul's talking about. Disputes between two Christians needs to be arbitrated between themselves to where it's best for each other. And so that way, Paul is echoing the words that Jesus spoke in Matthew 18, in verses 15 to 20. And let me share that with you, because they're important words that really do reflect what Paul has written. If your brother or sister sins, go and point out their fault, just between the two of you. If they listen to you, you have won them over. If they will not listen, take one or two more along, so that every matter may be established by the testimony of 2 or 3 witnesses. If they still refuse to listen, tell it to the church. And if they refuse to listen, even to the church, treat them as you would a pagan or a tax collector. Truly, I tell you, whatever you bind on earth will be bound in heaven, and whatever you loose on earth will be loosed in heaven. Again, truly, I tell you that if 2 of you on earth agree about anything they ask for, it will be done for them by my Father in heaven. For where 2 or 3 are gathered in my name, there am I in the midst of them. Notice how Jesus is asking us to seek the good between ourselves, not take it out, not take it around, not take it to court where it's always going to be a win or lose. He's asking that we start with the lowest point of contact, which is between me and you, see if we can't resolve it between ourselves, which means, what am I willing to forego? What if I hear what you're saying and I understand and I'm looking at you through the eyes of love, what then do I see? What am I hearing? Am I listening with the ear of the Spirit? Am I seeing with the eyes of the Spirit? Am I listening or understanding with the mind of the Spirit? Can I discern right and wrong, good and bad? And in this, my own need to possibly massage what I felt was happened to me. The Corinthians were quick to take their grievances to court, and issues were more often than not faith-based, and therefore didn't have any purpose being in the court. So Paul's contention is the lawsuits between 2 people already show defeat. The fact that you went to court, you chose this method of resolving an issue, means you are already defeated, because you're showing a total disrespect of your brother or your sister. And that merely fosters more division. Now I've got a reason to be angry at you because you beat me in court. You humiliated me. You did what where is the love in that? The Christ-like love. Because it's created a win-lose environment, and it's love versus the technicalities of law. Therefore, Paul says, people are called to remember they're no longer part of the world. Jesus has made a difference in you. Jesus should be the difference in you. And as a result, more now is at stake than ever before in terms of how you now relate to other people. Paul is saying to us, let's weigh not just the wrong or the issue, but let's look at the larger picture of who we are to each other and what should be the end result. Paul reminds the Corinthians that because of Jesus Christ, every single one of them has been washed, sanctified, justified. Those are not words that are new to us in this study. They came up in the second lesson when we talked about sanctification. This is what gives them their quality. This is what defines who they are. And it also then helps to guide them in terms of what is expected of them. How should they live their life? What kind of a mindset should they have? So unselfishness is practicing love with all of its components. I think for me, as I was reflecting on this, I went back to the 1970s to a movie that I watched because I was familiar with the characters and the events that this movie portrayed, and it was called Brian's Song, the story of Brian Piccolo. Now, those of you who aren't football fans, particularly Chicago Bear football fans, may not necessarily tie into this quickly. So let me give you a brief synopsis. Brian Piccolo was a running back who came out of Wake Forest University. And he was drafted by the Bears. At the same time, Gale Sayers, who was a running back in Kansas and was the premier running back in college football at that time, he was drafted. And as a result, the two men appeared in training camp together where they were competing for the running back position. And of course, Gale Sayers was chosen as the premier running back for the Bears with Brian Piccolo as his backup. Now that did not, Brian Piccolo accepted that decision, but not without some sense of wanting to earn that first position. So he worked harder, he continued to work, but he and Gale Sayers became very, very close personal friends. Make a long story short, Gale Sayers, in his second or third year, suffers a severe leg injury. They were playing the San Francisco 49ers, and Gale Sayers was having a great game, and he just, he got hit in such a way that it took his leg out from under him and caused severe injury. That meant that Brian Piccolo had to take his place in order for the game to go on, but also for the rest of the season that Gale Sayers was not able to play. Gale Sayers had reparative surgery, and then there was a recovery process. Brian Piccolo, knowing that right now he had the number one position, which he wanted, didn't want it in that way. He wanted to earn it. And that meant Gale Sayers had to be at his best. So he worked with his friend. He spent hours upon hours helping Gale Sayers rehab his leg so that he could get back to being the best running back he could be. That was selfless. Brian Piccolo had every reason to not do that. But he chose, one, because of his friend. He chose to help Gale Sayers get back into premier running shape. After Brian Piccolo died, he died of cancer, Gale Sayers retired, and he wrote a book called I Am Third. And by its name alone, a title alone, what Gale Sayers learned as a result of his experience with having a friend like Brian Piccolo was that God is first, friends are second, I am third. That's selflessness. That's beginning to put it into a context that we can live every single day. Synonyms for being unselfish are generous, benevolent, willing to make sacrifices, self-denying, selfless. So that's what, and that all grows out of what we call love, the Christ-like love. When we're going to be selfless, unselfish, it's not something that is accidental, and it can't be forced. It is intentional. It is something that emerges, that just grows out of our desire to love as Christ loved. You see, love in and of itself can be expressed, but it comes mostly in how we exhibit and demonstrate that with others. Jesus said in the Gospel of John, if you love me, and he said that to his beloved disciple John, or Peter. He said, if you love me, and Peter said, yeah, you know I love you. Well, then go feed my sheep. If you love me, tend my flock. If you love me, care for my lambs. What Jesus is saying is, if you love me, make this your primary goal of loving as I have loved you, selflessly, considering others more important than yourself. Now, I need to raise a moment of caution here, because being loving and unselfish it's not antiseptic. It's not just be this. It's okay when you're acting selflessly to feel good, to have a sense of peace or satisfaction in what's happening. It's okay to rejoice in the moment that someone else is benefiting and you are not. You are merely the conduit. It's okay to have to let everybody else take the applause. This, to be selfless, it's recognizing you don't need to have a pat in the back for having, oh, look what you did for this other person. Paul wants these folks to understand that they are to pour themselves out for the sake of others, as Jesus did. Remember, Jesus gave his life that others might live. Well, the expectation is we are going to pour out ourselves, to empty ourselves for the sake of others. Joy is, in fact, what ought to emerge here. I rejoice that this has happened for you. I rejoice that I could do this for you. And I don't feel any sense of loss. I don't feel any sense of that you owe me something later. This is what we do because we love other people. Now, this is a pretty straightforward kind of lesson, but it's so difficult to practice, to be selfless without getting some kind of compensation. I have done favors for folks. I have done some things where I said, let me do this for you, because I wanted to. I knew that it was something they could not do for themselves. So I chose to do it for them. And then at the end of the time, they tried to pay me. That's not how Christ's love works. I did not do this as a way of getting paid. I did it because I care about them. I wanted somehow or another for them to benefit and to have a little bit richer experience or opportunity to do the work they had to do or to live their life the way they needed to. And it was not a big deal for me to do what it was I did. But here again, this is not one of those pat on the back moments. I didn't need to be applauded. I didn't need to have them lift me up and tell others so that I could develop a business. I did this because it felt good. It was something I had to do. Selflessness. And I got joy in doing that, to know that someone else was going to have a little bit better opportunity to experience their life, this event, this work they had to do. I contributed to that. I rejoiced that I could. Now, I'm in no way a saint, but I use these examples that I'm most acquainted with as a way of being able to help you understand that things come up on a daily basis where we can be selfless, where we can be unselfish, and in the process, reflect the richness of that which God has given us in Jesus Christ, which is his love, a sacrificial, selfless kind of love. Now, with that having been said, I want to thank you that you've joined me today for this lesson. I want to encourage you to practice a selfless love and to be willing to give up, to forego whatever in order that others might benefit. And recognize at the end of the day, if you've done it with the right heart and spirit, there's not going to be some kind of an honor given to you, no plaque, no statue, no testimonial dinner. It may be forgotten about, if even ever known by anyone other than the person for whom you did this. And they might not even know it. Fact of the matter is, you do it because this is how we honor Christ, how we live in the fullness of that which he's given us. So do it. Practice it as a regular part of your life experience. Let's live unselfishly. So if you would join me, please, in our closing prayer. Lord, as we close this class, we want to remember God, who chose us before our birth, who calls us and knows us by name. And he now sends us out into the world to bring light to those in darkness, comfort to those who grieve, and hope to those who despair. Amen.